Howdy hackers and welcome to another episode of FairLight TV. Have you been holding your breath all the way since last week when you saw the first 80 minutes of discussion with Luigi, the chaos engineer? If so, you can now breathe in again because this is the second part of that interview. There will be another hour of interesting stuff that Luigi has to share. First, software on the actual C64 and a little bit of that, and then we will also have the learning part of how tape loaders work on the C64. And those three skid marks, what kind of things are they? They are totally incomprehensible before you watch him explain it. So when you have seen all of this, then you could possibly also understand how tape loaders work on the C64. If you don't understand it the first time, you always have the opportunity of winding back and seeing it again, because Luigi is doing a really good job explaining it. And I, to be honest, I actually think I do understand it now. So I'm getting really curious if I should write my own tape loader. Why not? Why not? Seemingly it's possible to do it, so why not? Well, anyway, let's dive into the second part of the interview with Luigi, the chaos engineer of Hokuto Force. Okay, should we go into software on the C64? With Lasse Örni, I guess, you have been working on an IFFL that is also, one that is published doesn't support save, but I know you have something which is an IFFL that supports save, and I'm a bit envious of that.
Right. So, I mean, there is a background story to this one. Yeah. So Hokuto Force had produced an IFFL system, and I think it does. I mean, Flavio Webb is behind. I mean, he did some of the contribution to that, and I think he had to do some customizations for his crack of Rubicon. And I think he had to add the 1-bit transfer because he needed sprites, you know, the animation during the load times. So he needed sprites, and initially they had the 2-bit protocol, and he couldn't use sprites with that. So I know for a fact that we do have. I've seen the source code as well. We do have an IFFL as a team which supports save and which supports 1-bit transfers. But what I wanted to do was to actually provide something back to the community. I mean, the IFFL by Lasse is open source. So is its loader system. Everything is open source. What Hokuto Force did was to actually convert it to the TAS64 dialect, and all the style changed, and it's very difficult to do a visual diff between the original code and the new code to see where, you know, what was retrofitted, what was added, and this sort of thing. So I said, you know what, I know that the code exists. I will not look at it, but I will re-implement pretty much all the bonuses that we've added. You guys have added within the team, and again, Flavio Webb was. I mean, I don't know who else was involved, but Flavio Webb was involved with a number of these changes. I said, I'll make it in a way that you can actually make a diff with the original and see what I wedged in. And so I started with adding the compressors. So I added support for
PU crunch
and Exomizer, and again.
No, Exomizer is in the original. That's. But you might
not
have added.
Not in the IFFL. It was in the loader system.
Okay. Sorry, I'm using the normal loader system. So I'm also using Lasse's code.
It does have support for them, for both PU crunch, and Exomizer.
But you also do byte booster, I believe.
I added byte booster too because it does not require a decrunch buffer on the Commodore 64. And so if you're doing a very, you know, kind of dense release, like Last Ninja 2 or something like that, then, you know, you can benefit from not having to allocate 200 bytes or something like that on the Commodore 64 side. And so I added it. However, I remember that we also found issues with the encoder side of it, and that's one of the reasons for which I created the fork for the encoder. But if the IFFL system then started growing, and I started essentially retrofitting or adding all the features that were found in Lass's loader, I added them to the IFFL, and essentially I was very happy. I published it and I said, thanks very much to Lasse. I added support for other disk drives that were not supported by the initial IFFL system. I provided the disk images for D81 as well. All of these, I said, I got it for free to start with. This has all to go free. Now, what I wasn't too keen on sharing, for a number of reasons, but the most important reason, the save bit of this, I'm not comfortable sharing it because I'm not sure it's as robust as it needs to be. And I don't want somebody else to have to, put their hair out, tear their hair out. I mean, on one point, I'll probably get back to it and trying to, figure out what is wrong. Oh. And this is one of those painstaking sessions in the Vice's monitor to see, both the drive side and the Commodore 64 side. And I wrote the code, so I understand. But the logic on a high level is very simple. When you save, you do exactly the same thing that you do while loading, but you do it in the reverse order. So the transfer routines from on the IEC bus, you have them both in my source code. You have them both, so you already know how to send data to the drive. In the drive, when there is a ROM routine, because I use the ROM routines to read and write disks to the sectors, to read sectors. For the read routine, there is a write counterpart, which takes the same parameters pretty much. It's very intuitive. Once you know where the read is, and it's in my source code, you know where the write is. And it's really a simple exercise to do it. The only thing you need to do is appreciate how do I tell the drivers, the drive code, that I actually don't want to read the file 3, but I want to save it because it's a high score table, as example. And the technique that they used in Hokuto Force, which I then ended up reusing, is okay, why don't we say that the first 6 bits are the number of the file I want to write, and the 7th bit is a flag. Says, if it's clear, it's what I want to read. If it's set, it's what I want to save. And I ended up reusing it. I can, disclose this. I don't think that is not particularly anybody can come up with this. But what this does, it essentially reduces the number of files that you can have in the IFFL table to pretty much half of it.
Yeah, but you still have so little memory. So if you're going to have a table of track sector and offset, then you basically can't have more than 127 anyway. So it's
yeah. And but we had the strategy to tackle this, and we said, and I think at that point, FlyWeb was adding support for Byte Booster 2 as well for the same reason, because it didn't require an unpack buffer. And we say, what if we add support for chained files? So you essentially get all of them together in a single file, and then you tell the decompressor, if the file is not, if you're not at the end of the file, you keep doing the same thing. It's a new file, and you start unpacking it. And that's when we found out the bug in Byte Booster 2, and I figured out that it wasn't actually terminating properly files. So if you stick 2 together, when the first one finishes, in very rare situations, it's not always the case, in very rare conditions, and then FlyWeb had this problem. So I fixed it for both of us. When you chain them together, sometimes you have got extra bits in one of the files at the end, and that throws the cruncher off completely, and it just doesn't do the job on the next file. But once that was fixed, essentially what you needed was just chain the files. So the limitation on the fact that you couldn't have as many files as before Now you could only have 64, but you could chain as many as you wanted in a single file. So if you had to do, load a level and you had the 30 files, you could just one loader call anyway. And so we got to a kind of a reasonable, compromise in which we said, okay, fair enough, we can do it this way. So let's implement it that way.
And again, IFFL is linking multiple files, and then when you start the game, you have something that scans that file and builds a table of track and sector and offset to that file. So when you want to load from the IFFL, you just tell them, I would like file number 5, for instance, and then it knows the track and sector and offset. And the reason you're doing is because when you store a file, the last sector is only statistically half full. If you join multiple files, that means that you could save like half a block for every file. And if you are fighting over who has the smallest release, then that could be a very good reason. The other potentially good argument for IFFL is that because you don't need to read the directory of the disk to find the track and sector of the file, that actually means that if you are loading file number 120, the disk drive would find that file equally fast as like file number 1, or possibly file number 10 or whatever. But if you compare that to normal file-based releases, even if you have a fast loader, then finding like file 120 could take very long, because it needs to traverse the directory into finding that last file. And it would take, what would that be, 120 divided by 8, or how many you could have per sector. So it becomes faster finding files further down in the list, and it's also saving blocks for you in your release. Those are kind of the two arguments. The counter argument for IFFL is the fact that you are adding complexity, and support for like SD2 IEC is also very difficult because it doesn't have any RAM in it, so it's not like a full disk drive. And yeah, so there are arguments, pros and cons for IFFL, and since I don't have anything that really works well for saving, I do have Nostos, but I never managed to kind of compile a working version of it, so it doesn't really help that I have access to it. So that's, yeah, I would be one of the happy beta testers if you decide to release something that has full support for saves as well. But I'm a kick assembler guy, so I would need to convert it to kick assembler.
Yeah, but one of the things I do, and this I do a lot, when I take a project that is pre-existing, unless I disassembled it, you know, Bram's code is an example of that. But if there is an existing project and they use their own lingo, you know, their own dialect for the, I tend to use the same compilation tools. Is it Acme? I use Acme. That's pretty much. Is it DASM? You know, the TLR one? I just use DASM. Is it task 64 task, whatever it is, I stick to it because it makes it easier to then do the diffs and see exactly what you fit in. And somebody wants to actually, you know, do the same or extend it, knows exactly which areas you've touched. And that's one of the reasons for which you will see I never stopped really. For this project, I always keep the original tools, and I tend to try to provide the binaries of those tools that have been tested with so that, you know, if you update, you don't risk them, you know, that tool set breaks. So you can always replicate the experience. That hopefully that has helped a few, you know, poor souls out there. Because I mean, sometimes I had to recompile old versions of tools just because the new ones weren't working as expected. So it was quite painful.
Yeah, I do compile my own version of Vice, but that's the only thing. I don't code C. I code Delphi on the PC. That's only high level language I know, unless you call basic high level. But I'm envious that you are able to do that. And Yeah, I know too little C. I hate the pointers and addresses to pointer and pointers to addresses of pointer. I go totally I get totally lost in C code.
Yeah, I mean, if you want performance, you need pointers. That's fast, you know, the simple. Sure. Yeah, the simple thing.
And I understand assembler. It's just that the annotation in C just confused me. So
yeah.
Okay, so the next part is SPUTM.
Yeah.
I don't know if you pronounce it like that.
Yeah. It's actually, I mean, a lot of these acronyms and initials were supposed to be related to actually spitting. I mean, this one would have actually be SPUTM. I mean, it was a joke. I mean, Ron Gilbert was, you know, he was talking about these things back in the day, and yeah, I'm wondering whether he ever saw, you know, this thing, but it was something I did for fun, essentially. At some point, I said, you know,
let's first describe what it is. How would you describe what is it?
Right. So this essentially is an engine, a game engine that allows you to render a graphic adventure style game to an end user, to a gamer, on the Commodore 64. In this specific, in my case, in my specific
like
case,
Carmen Diego or Monkey Island or those kind of games where you have like big graphics and then you have the words are there, so you point and click at the words rather than trying to type the words.
Yeah, I mean, if you have ever seen the project SCAM-VM, that's pretty much an OS independent engine that can read the data files of those games for PC, Amiga, I think, you know, it's kind of different formats, and it can render the experience of modern computers for games that you wouldn't be able to install and run anymore on modern computers. So essentially, you know, this was supposed to be, you know, its own stripped down version of something like that. But of course, you know, you couldn't ever run even the Amiga version of Monkey Island 2. You could never run it on the Commodore 64. But I wanted to show that if you are willing to put some work, some time, and some talent, especially graphical talent in it, you can actually provide a very, very convincing experience on the Commodore 64. And I remember when I published this, the pushback was, yeah, no, the Commodore 64 never needed this, it will never need it. You know, we had the text adventures. And I say, look, what if I give this to you with USB host 64? Which means I can fit as much graphic as I want. It loads as fast. I mean, I did a slideshow, you know, kind of slow motion slideshows, more than one actually, with USB host 64. Okay, you cannot play back a movie, you know, you can't get a frame rate that is decent enough for a movie, but you can pretty much do a slow motion. So it's very fast to load data. So you could totally have a whole graphic adventure and do a lot of swapping data in and out for any particular location in a fraction of a second, and the end user would never really notice. Much better than a cartridge, because I mean the storage is unlimited. I mean, for the purposes of the Commodore 64, the storage on a USB flash drive with the FAT32 is pretty much unlimited. So you could stack as much data as you wanted. And that was another reason for which USB host 64 kind of really fascinated me, because I mean he did provide. I mean, forget about Reo or any other expansion that was actually designed back in the day. This was practically unlimited storage space, and it would have made things like a port of Monkey Island 2 possible. So I put together the code, and just for fun, I did a conversion of the first location in Monkey Island 2, the one where Largo, it kind of puts you upside down and takes all your belongings in the very beginning. So that was a conversion.
I have never played it. I'm humbly ashamed, but I've never played it.
Yeah, there you go. When you find, you will have sometime, just to dip a foot in it, because it's very comical as well. I mean, that's one of the things I like about Ron Gilbert's adventures. It's kind of
it's like Pirates. I also haven't played Pirates, but which is, I know I'm strange in several ways. I've never watched Game of Thrones either, so there are aspects of life that I know everybody else knows that I'm totally clueless of. So but so would you say it's possible to do the full Monkey Island?
With a lot of work, yes. But bear in mind, the one I did, the graphic for the first level I did, that was a conversion. And I think people spotted it. I mean, there's no chance. I mean, I'm not a pixel artist. Let's be clear. I can do a few things, and I did things for Integrator 2012 as well to just try and recreate an Amiga game on the Commodore 64. So I can fight my way through a few things, but by no means the quality of hand pixelated image. So I did the conversion with C64 Dither, which was one of my programs. I don't remember if I ever made it public or not, but essentially I did a lot of work, especially the slideshows and that kind of stuff. I did it with my own tool, and there are other tools on the scene for converting PC graphics to the Commodore 64. But this one I did it myself, and I did a lot of polishing afterwards. So I was quite happy with the image. I say, you know what, the image is so good that I really want to reproduce that feeling. I didn't have the music to go by because nobody made a Monkey Island 2 tune for the Commodore 64. So I had to go with the tune for Monkey Island 1. I said, okay, well, I mean, at least, it's not a miles away. It's kind of the same series. So, people will forgive me for this. And then I started doing the coding of, the engine itself, the objects, the inventory, the pointer, the hot areas where you can click and interact with, the verbs, and that kind of stuff. And then I started converting the sprites for Guybrush. Now, that is a little bit an overkill because, I mean, one frame of Guybrush takes 11 sprites. And, there is multiplexing, by the way, it's kind of a line-based multiplexing. But it's a lot of sprites. But the result was quite nice to look at. And I say, look, I'm putting it out. It's anyone can feel free to reuse it or contact me if they want to see the code or want me to share, this sort of things. But I'm not gonna code and do the conversion of the graphic for Monkey Island because that I rarely have time. I mean,
my suggestion would be that when Vito is done with Eye of the Beholder, he would be free to do something like that. I'm sure he would find that very, very interesting. And if you just did the game part, he could do the graphics part, and we would have Monkey Island.
Yeah. I mean, that'd be great. I mean, even starting with kind of proof of concept. Few locations to interact with. That'd be great. As I said, he would have to use modern storage capacities, and we probably would have to develop on emulators with those kind of widespread EasyFlash kind of something like that to start with. But yeah, I mean that'd be something very interesting.
I mean, a release on, again, talking about Eye of the Beholder. That's a rather big game that sits on a cartridge. So and Jackasser has done this scaled down version of a cartridge, which is simpler than an EasyFlash and cheaper than an EasyFlash. So if that was the basis, then that will work as well. Yeah. I would look forward to that. Then I could finally play Monkey Island. If you release it on the C64, I would play Monkey Island. I promise you that.
Yeah. I mean, we would have to do both episodes then.
Yeah.
Start from the first one now.
That's fine.
But yeah, no. To your point, I haven't had the TV for 20 years, and that's one of the reasons for which I can do all of this stuff because I have nothing else to do.
That's good. Don't buy one.
Yeah.
So going through this, we're now over 1.5 hours, but I'm pretty sure that the educational part in the end will need to be on the next episode. But we still have a number of items, and the next one would be the EasyFlash Loader.
Right. Yeah.
So EasyFlash. Now I stop you. EasyFlash is a cartridge on the C64. You plug it in, and you can program it. So it's sort of a mix between expert cartridge and a regular cartridge. So something you can populate with anything you want, and yeah, and there you go.
Yeah, and at some point in the scene, you could see more and more people releasing for EasyFlash.
Yeah.
So I said, maybe I should, dip a foot in that pool and, trying to get familiar with the tool set and with, how to do an EasyFlash release, just in case, I need to do one or I want to work on one, or I feel particularly motivated, to do something with this. So I started looking into the SDK to produce, CRT files that you would then burn to an EasyFlash 3 or, copy across. And actually, I have got a version one, the early version of it, in which you had the, PC software, and you had to actually burn, the memory from the Commodore 64. So I had to split. I think I had to split the file to copy to disk. I mean, I remember going through a number of shenanigans back in the day when I had to do these things. But when I was testing, it was an early version. Didn't have the USB port to it, so you can do lots of things. But I started dipping a foot in that pool, and what I found out was that it seemed like the material in the SDK was not really playing very well with the hardware. I don't remember the exact problem, but I had to just rewrite a lot of the examples and change, something very substantial on a low level, because it was wrong in the examples. I don't know whether I ended up in a repo that was outdated or something like that. But what I did actually was to rewrite those examples again, open source. I found it open source. I provide it as open source again in GitHub, and I provided examples on how to do it, how to create CRT files, how to create disk demos that could disable the cartridge at will, this sort of things. But then the time came for the 30th anniversary of Left Ninja, and that was 2018. And I thought, it would be great to do an IFFL version of it. But the overkiller said, you know what, it'd be even greater if you could do an EasyFlash version of it. And I said, you know what, because I've done all of this research already, I prepared, ahead of time. You know what, I will do an IFFL for EasyFlash. And I actually wrote a loader that is essentially, when you look, into it, it's an open source version, absolutely, it's on GitHub. It's free, and it's exactly the tool I used to do my 30th anniversary version of Left Ninja 2. And it's really inspired to the IFFL, the whole idea, in which you have, this chain into a single entity, and you have you can work out where different files start. And I did a little bit of exotic things that, I mean, they're not exotic for you, but it's kind of in general for an end user, for a gamer, a little bit of exotic stuff, like transfers while interrupts were active, bank switching with the with the music playback, a little bit over the kind of average sort of things I had seen to that point. And this is all free, all open source, by the way. I have examples to that. Load the picture and then load the music, and then while the picture is loading, start the playback of the set tune as well. And I did my version of Last Ninja 2, and with this IFFL for EasyFlash. And as you said, I actually went into the game data itself, and I changed all the things that I thought were just were left in a state that was not quite right. I mean, I remember in one level, I think it was level 5, there was this table that was just in the wrong position. Definitely it was, you know, kind of somebody, you know, Hugh Riley probably forgot to or maybe the editor back in the day was so awkward to use that they say, you know what, I can't be bothered, you know, I'll just leave it the way it is. Or, you know, certain elements were not mirrored in, you know, they weren't in the right form. So I noticed all of this, and I said, okay, I'm going to go and fix, because I have the editor now, and I went in and, you know, fixed all of these things, which nobody else could have done, because they, you know, it's kind of that painstaking, you know, work of reverse engineering and find the data format and everything. I'm not aware of anyone. I mean, it's not bragging. It's just like it happens over time. Starting in 2012, that by 2018 I had already done the work. If you had to do it just for a release, that would have been insane. But, you know, anyone would say no, it's just insane to do all this work just to fix those things. But I had already done the work in a kind of a different project. So by that time I said, okay, I'm going to fix all of these issues. And I actually did.
You are for sure the go-to guy when it comes to Last Ninja. I hope I'm the go-to guy with alternate reality, but if I had any question related to Last Ninja, you would be the first one to know.
Yeah, you know, that's fair, because I actually reverse engineer pretty much everything. The only point that you know, I'm still kind of trying to put better comments and trying to get a more in-depth understanding is the artificial intelligence side of it. So the enemy, the opponent, you know, how does that work? You know, what happens? Why, when you run away, does it decide to throw a shuriken at you? Or why does it, when does it know that it needs to take its weapon out because you are closing up? That's this sort of things. But there are also, you know, dumb sides to the opponents that, you know, fascinate me. So that's the whole kind of game AI. That's the only bit that I really left when I disassembled and you know, documented it. I left it in a little bit of a state. I said, okay, I want to come back on this one and make you know, more comments for my future self. You know, I can imagine myself retiring and still looking at this thing. So for that time, I need better comments for that Luigi, because that Luigi will probably not be as, you know, kind of as sharp as he could be. So I say, okay, I'll help him a little bit.
Yeah, we don't improve over the years when it comes to the fast way of thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, so work on Byte Booster, we already talked about that. That was the thing where it depacked wrong. So was there anything else on Byte Booster too?
Yeah, the issue was really the packer side of things, and I contacted David and said, you know, there's a problem here, and yeah, he actually confirmed it, and I released my own version with the addition of the bit I added. There was an extension I added, not to write the PRG address into the resulting files, so you could concatenate them into that single file that you could load in the decompress with the single loader code. But yeah, that was pretty much it. I mean, again, this is something that David has put, you know, has done excellent work on. It was just, I think, an oversight in the end. But I mean, the use case of chaining files was probably not something he had at that point. We had it when we were trying to do these IFFL releases and chain together files. So yeah,
I've had a talk with Lasse on, and he uses it extensively in Hessian. So he loads this file, and it's actually not that file. It's a chain of files. So he loads a file with this name, which means that he wants this chain of stuff that sits in the same file. So yeah. Okay, so reassembly of Vorpal. That's the next thing on my list here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that one was quite fun, because yeah, it's one of the activities I got somehow involved with. I just don't understand how I, you know, kind of in my journey switching from one thing to another, and how I got on these things. But yeah, I mean, I was always fascinated to try and deconstruct how things work. And so I was naturally attracted to this sort of activities. And,
is this part of the G64 analysis?
Yeah, that's pretty much what comes with the CBM Flux Studio.
Yeah.
And what has been published also in my book. Actually, the sort of the core, the initial part of my book was to try and create a single place where you could find this information. Because if you were looking for this information before I started, planning this project, you would have lots of nodes, load-class nodes, lots of nodes on Vmax here and there. Websites with broken links now. It's fading away. That information is fading away.
Yeah, for sure.
And I said, I need to have a central repository in which I share all of this. So that's the reason of the book. The book wasn't to become a millionaire, because that's not likely to happen, I'm afraid. But it was
wrong subject. You would need to be gossip
absolutely.
on celebrities or something. That's what you can become a millionaire of. That's what a number of people are interested in. Not that I understand it, but seemingly they are.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so I do have one little sort of question before we go to the educational part, and that is the crack of Rubicon. So you guys in HF are the only ones who actually managed to crack Rubicon. And in doing so, you had to make your own patched version of your kernel ROM. And so please elaborate a bit on that.
Right. So I'd like disclaimer. The disk version has been worked out by Flavio Webb, who is an absolute genius when it comes to these things. So he did 99.9% of the work. What I did was pretty much, by that time he started working on the disk version, I had already finished my crack for the tape version and all the patches for the protection that Fnaki had put in it. So by that point, I had the trainers, and so I helped with that bit. What Flavio Webb did was actually to crack it, to crack Timex, which is the protection. It was just, it was a later version of Timex, and he actually did the job, but he did it in Vice Monitor. And I said, look, Flavio, we have a problem here. The whole point of me doing the tape version was I want to show that with tools of the 90s, you could have done it. I think you should try and aim for the same thing. It's difficult, but it's still a ton easier when you have Vice Monitor.
Yes, because you can set freeze points in the disk drive. Yeah, that's so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Timex, you can actually set things up so that you can see each single line that is decoded. You can see it, there are ways. But in the end, you can put a breakpoint on the memory execute command, and you have all the code in the drive, and you just copy it out and start studying it, reverse engineering. I said, look, we need to do something that is special. We need to provide essentially hints on how this could have been done in the past. And I started researching this, and I found an interview with Antitrack on this was on Bitfellas. It was from a while before, and he actually said the number of was talking about a number of weak points in Timex that he actually had the authors correct, but he also said, look, at the end of the day, essentially, I'm not using the same word, but he said, at the end of the day, if I used my own patched version of the kernel in the drive, this would be a walk in the park. Because I could stop the memory execute command, and then I could read everything out of the drive. I said, Flavio, why don't we actually deliver on exactly that? Let's find how to patch the memory execute command so that it doesn't execute. And then at that point, I'm satisfied that we pretty much have done something that could have been done in the 90s. So he went on, researched it, and he proposed it to me. He said, I would patch it this way, and then, we could have burned it to an EPROM, desoldered the EPROM if it wasn't socketed, put the new one. That's how I started looking at his proposed patch, and I said, Flavio, you just got it. That's it. I think we're satisfied with everything you've done. And let's just work at the release process, high score saver. He did the D81 version, which apparently had triggered protections that he hadn't seen during the, I mean, don't quote me on this one, but I think at some point we had a problem that was specific to the D81 version. And this came up during the testing, internal testing, and we said, okay, this looks like a protection from Snacky. It definitely looks unlimited energy for one of the opponents. That is the signature of a protection. So he said, he went back, and I think he managed to fix all of them, and disable all of the protections that were.
It could actually be an original protection by Gollum, because a number, because he implemented protections on like trainer protection. So if you implemented a trainer, he would have detections of a number of aspects, and Snacky, when producing the original, had issues with those, presumably when he did the crack of it. It wasn't him doing it, it was Tiger, I think. That's sort of the official story, but they had issues of implementing the trainer, so they needed the original coder to tell how to defeat the
and it's difficult after the facts, to try and differentiate between which one is which. Essentially, I just listed all the protections I had found in the taper version, and I said, this is what I know about. If I do this transfer, it works end to end, and I can play the whole game, get back to the beginning, high score table, and that kind of stuff. So to the best of my knowledge, these are the ones that are relevant in this case. There might be more, don't get me wrong, there might be more, but because that was working end to end, I just settled on okay.
But again, the emulators they have done it so much easier for us, because now we can say that we want to trigger a breakpoint upon reading a certain address, and given that it's very difficult to find all the instances that could possibly address, because if you just search for the address, you might not find it, because it's read x, where x is something, and it's finding all those potential instances. And I know from the description on CSDB that there was something of reading tables, poking into 0 page and reading 0 page, y, and that poked into the timers. And so searching for timer references in the game, that wouldn't give you anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there is a text on CSDB on your version of it where this is elaborated on, right? It's, I think, the production note. There is a quite extensive text of so if somebody wanting to read up on this particular thing, then let's point them there, and they can read the details there.
That's pretty much a dump. I think Hednik did the dump of my blog post, or somebody, one of the moderators did the dump of, because they say links might break in the future. So rather than pointing to the blog post, we're adding the production notes.
It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you, but I don't think I've had this long between coffee since I was like 20. So I'm sort of shaking because of the lack of coffee, and I would also not like to kind of steal all your night here, because we've spent a lot of time on this, and I'm humbly grateful that you have been able to allocate such long time with me, and it was one of the most funny talks I've had in months and possibly years. So I'm absolutely grateful that you allocated the time for us.
Yeah, likewise, it's been an honor to be on the show. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Luigi, and all the best. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye now. Bye.
I will intercept the interview here. The recording you just saw was done, and then we continued on to discussing, or Luigi explaining how tapes work. And but given a number of days passed since, Luigi really wasn't too happy how that came out. He wanted to add illustration, because, I mean, if you can add graphics to your discussion, then that makes it a lot more understandable. So we have just concluded a second session where we dived into tapes, and Luigi had the opportunity of explaining and also showing using pictures. So This is the time. This is where you will see Luigi really explaining how tapes work. Luigi, take it away.
So in this first visual, which apologies, I hadn't drawn this one and did a scan of it, but I'll probably put it in a kind of more palatable format, PowerPoint sort of at a later point. So in this first visual, I've tried to capture the way that the CBM ROM loader encodes data on tape. And I've started with the analog version of the pilot sequence. Somebody draws this as a sine wave, and I draw it this way because it feels more natural to me. But you know, what's really on the tape is kind of it's not too important, because what I'd like to focus on is the signal on the tape port. This is the read pin of the tape port on the Commodore 64. So by the time this signal goes through the op amps and the Schmidt trigger in the tape drive, it's amplified and clipped, and it becomes a square wave from 0 volts to 5 volts. And the pilot itself is made of square waves that have got a period of about 376 clock cycles. And this is independent of the clock frequency of the machine. So it's always, you know, pretty much this amount. Again, in an ideal world, this would all look the same, but there is, you know, in the real world, you have tolerances and timing and that sort of thing. So this, even if these square waves pretty much should be the same, they end up being a different number of clock cycles. And bear in mind that the Commodore 64 actually can only detect the negative edge of a square wave. So that's why I've shown that the duration of the square wave is from negative edge to negative edge. This is just the way the read pin on the tape port is wired in the Commodore 64 hardware, which goes actually to the flag line of one of the CIA, and that is edge sensitive. Again, in software, you don't have a register mapped to the state of this line. All you have is a bit in one of the CIA status registers that tells you whether or not you have gone through a negative edge, and that's pretty much all you have. So the C16 has got access to, you know, the level on the read line, and some turbo loaders can actually leverage that and create even faster loaders, believe it or not, than what is possible on VIC-20 or Commodore 64. But the Commodore 64, unfortunately, is limited in what you can measure. So the way it goes is it uses one of the timers and measures the distance between two negative edges. Now, if you sample this, again, if you sample the pilot of the CBM ROM loader, you will find out, you know, this sort of clock cycles. And you can expect that this is going to be a bell curve centered around what is, you know, an ideal value. The reality is that, you know, things are so wobbly in a sense, you know, again, tolerance of components, that even if you sample this same train twice, you're not going to get anywhere near these values. It's just all over the place. But again, it's a bell curve. It's a, you know, normal distribution around ideal values, which is always also the reason for which, you know, saying that you can, you know, sample these signals with a very low jitter in the routines that you use for sampling. You know, you go to the nanoseconds and that kind of stuff. It's just inconsequential, to be honest with you. It's inconsequential. This stuff is all over the place. So that sort of precision is not required. So this is the pilot train, and we will see later that this is about, you know, the standard length of the standard duration of the whole pilot is 10 seconds. And essentially, this is the hiss that back in the day you could hear when you had one of those Marpes record tape drives for which you could enable the audio output to a piezo speaker, and you would actually hear a hiss every time a Commodore file is starting on the cassette, which is also convenient to actually position the tape drive on the next file. The OS uses this pilot train actually to essentially adjust the timing of the read routines so that it can tolerate variations in the motor speed and the variation of components, the tolerances of resistors, capacitors, and that kind of stuff without problems. And that's one of the reasons for which you can also cross-load basic programs, as example, from VIC-20 to Commodore 64 or from NTSC to PAL. When it comes to the data itself, there is a little bit more going on, and this is essentially frequency shift keying, for which you have different frequencies carry different information. During a data byte, what you usually see is a combination of short pulses, and again, this is the same square wave frequency that is used in the pilot for the short pulse. But then there is another one, which is the medium pulse, and it's slightly longer. I've put here 520. It's ballpark. Again, these values should be taken with a grain of salt. They are clock cycles. They're close to what you would expect, but they can be a little bit different. Again, it's a normal distribution. So I've put here a short, medium, as they are referred to, and then a medium short. And each bit in a Commodore 64 file is encoded by a couple of them, short, medium, or medium short. That's pretty much the only two configurations. One is 0 and one is 1. That's one of the reasons which the tape loader designed by Commodore is so slow. Every bit has got, has to go to be encoded with two square waves, as opposite to commercial turbo loaders that are much faster. And also don't forget, every file is repeated twice for comparison, but that also saved us in the preservation work nowadays, because if one copy is broken, you can always extract the data and reconstruct the broken one from the healthy one. And then there is this long pulse, which is pretty much used as an end bit marker by Commodore. This doesn't occur very often, pretty much at the end of a byte, and
at the end of a byte, so like every 8th, every 9th. Then
there is a parity bit. So you're right, every 9 bits. But those bits have got actually 2 pulses for each, so it's essentially a pulse every 20. That's the kind of ratio that you have there. And again, ballpark value is about this one. Now, if you were to make a histogram of occurrences, and you were on the x-axis you were measuring those clock cycles, and on the y-axis you were plotting the occurrences. And this diagram is I mean, there is no values here, because it's by no means a quantitative one. It's just just give an idea of the bell curves around the ideal frequencies, and pretty much the fact that the short pulses here occur much more often than anything else, if not for no other reason, but there are about 27,000 of them in each pilot alone. So that contributes to the fact that this bell curve is higher than the second one. Otherwise, the two would be pretty much the same order of magnitude on average, assuming a uniform distribution of bits 0 and 1 in a file. What is really instead what is really low compared to the other two is the long pulse, because again, it's only used every so often for the end bit. So there's not many of them. So if you were to do this sort of exercise over, a cassette that has only got CBM ROM loader files, you would end up with something that looks like this. Now,
so if we just scroll up, and I will just summarize the way I understand it. So the first one is the analog for the pilot, and then you have the pilot, which is basically a long stream of zeros that the system can use to adjust to ensure that it knows sort of the standard variation of that particular tape. And then we get into sort of where data comes, and the analog would also be different. Then it wouldn't look exactly like that one, because that is the analog look for only zeros, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
I actually think I understand this.
Yeah.
You have done an excellent job already.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the idea is that I didn't want to actually create analog versions for these ones, because I didn't want to focus too much. I mean, this is a little, as I said, it's a little bit controversial what the real shape of this wave is. And I think, if we just sit on the tape port and ignore that one for a minute, what really matters is the sort of the zero crossings of this signal, if you wish, and essentially the negative edges of the square wave. That's all that matters. And that's why the emulators of the tape drive are so good, and at doing the playback, because they only need to be worried about the digital signal, essentially. And having a digital signal created of a synthetic tap file is much easier. You don't have to deal with all the shenanigans, tolerances of these signals. So, and it's so much easier to just produce this. This can be produced as, it essentially is like a pulse width modulation, sort of that's the complexity that you have to deal with when you're trying to synthesize this sort of square waves when you are playing a tab file into a Commodore home computer. Right. So let's get to the main topic then of this conversation. So when you are measuring all these pulses, you actually start monitoring the pulses coming in. You sit essentially in this scenario, this thought experiment, you sit on the tape port and you're just wire sharking the signal coming in, and you're saying, okay, if it's a short pulse, I just I put a small dot here, corresponding to what the clock cycle is for that pulse that is coming in. And we know that when the file is starting, when the CBM when a file encoded with the CBM loader is starting, you will get a whole bunch of these ones, and they will not be on a straight line, but there will be many of them. 27,000, 136, and this is an exact number because that's what the save routines write down back to tape. So you will see as many of them coming in, and you will find yourself marking them on this graph. Now this graph goes on with time on the y-axis, and time is like this. Sometimes you can see this graph, and the tab clean has got a way to display this graph rotated by 90 degrees. So essentially you have time on the horizontal axis, which is more convenient for some people. But because the recorder used to plot things this way, I've just historically felt it more natural to see it with the measured clock cycles on the x-axis and time on the y-axis. At some point, when you get to the 10 seconds mark, you will start seeing other pulses as well. You will see, the other bit pulses, which are medium. And again, this is the duration you measure in clock cycles, and you will see a bunch of, short and medium, and eventually you also see a long one that is marking the end of a byte. And this process repeats all over the place. You will see things jumping back and forth here and there, and then you will see 1 here. And over again until the end, when there is a little bit of trailer here for the Commodore format, which creates the necessary gap between a file and another, make sure that everything is written properly, and it's kind of an handoff sequence at that point. 27,000 and or in hexadecimal 6800. Now, if you do the math, and this is one of the simple ones, if you multiply 27,136 by 376 clock cycles, or 374, 378, it doesn't really matter. You get a number that is about 10 millions. When you divide that by the frequency of the clock on a Commodore 64, what you get is about 10 seconds. That's the whole reason for which it was chosen to be 6800. And again, this is fundamental for the loader, because if you have got a tape motor that is slower or faster, what ends up is that your signal will probably end up being, I'm just drawing lines here, but this is this is the same thing as the skid marks. So your signal might end up looking like this. So there isn't just a bias, there is a factor that is moving the measured clock cycles, is moving them on the right in this case. But the OS on the Commodore 64, based on these 10 seconds, it can essentially adjust the time routines, so it knows that it will have to expect different values for the medium pulses and long pulses as well.
And one of the things which was sort of an aha for me, is that I previously saw this as 3 parallel things, but that's not really true. There is, if you would zoom in, there is only a single dot on the line, but just because it's sort of pressed, that becomes sort of a line rather than individual dots. So if you would zoom into one sort of clock cycle here, you would only have a dot on one of the 3 columns.
Yeah, that's right. The idea is that if you just put one dot only, and then you move on to the next line, what happens is this diagram, it goes by very fast, and probably you can appreciate every single pulse value, but it scrolls very, very quickly. So what I've decided in my tools is that I keep riding on the very same line until I get about 5,000 worth of clock cycles, and then I move on, and any remainder from 5,000, I use it to start the new line and bear that one in mind, which means that after a certain amount of lines, it's always a unit of time. Specifically, I think it's 198 lines is going to be 1 second. And that's going to be constant, all the time. So the diagram essentially scrolls in a uniform way over time. And you can always say after 198 lines, you have 1 second worth of that, which means that in every line you have overlapping stuff. Yes, but if you were, seeing these from the tape port, you would see one or the other pulse coming in, and you would mark them, individually. So yeah, it's compressed, as you said. Yes, it's compressed in the y-axis, so that as I said, about 198 lines are 1 second all the time.
And the little wobbly, it doesn't become a full straight line, and the little wobbly there means that's also showing sort of the bell curve here, the little variation of duration between the instances here. So but as long as they don't overlap, the bell curves absolutely shouldn't overlap. They should be clear that if you are clearly a short or a medium, then they could wobble a bit, and it's not really a problem.
Yeah. I mean, if you take these values and divided them by 8, you actually get the values in a tab file, which was defined this way, so that essentially for most of these values, you can encode them with a single byte, and you don't need a 16-bit format or anything like that. Now, if you were to do that, these are tab values at the bottom of the axis, and these are real numbers, zero occurrences. This is for a cassette tape, which is a 90-minute cassette tape with only CBM ROM loader files on it. And this has been generated in a Jupyter notebook, which I share on GitHub. You can see that these bell curves, they're actually, bell curves. You can see the relationship between, the occurrences, and you can see there is a zillion, there's a lot of space, which means these bell curves could be even, wider in the case in which, the signal is not coming in that clean. So these bell curves can spread quite a bit before you start having problems where you cannot differentiate the two consecutive ones anymore. There is a lot of room for these things to move around, and that's one of the reasons for which this loader is very reliable. You can imagine all sorts of wobbling, all sorts of tolerances, components aging, and that sort of thing. These bell curves would still be quite far apart, that you would still be able to differentiate between the two. What you can have, I've seen this myself a number of times. What you can have is that you can have things like wobbling like this. Yeah, and sometimes it's just the friction of the tape. Sometimes it's not that it was recorded this way. It's just that there is friction in the tape. The tape became a little bit sticky. But as long as you have them clearly separated, maybe the Commodore 64 cannot load this anymore, but tab clean can, as long as there is a clear threshold, there is a clear zone in which those two are differentiated.
Slalom is not a problem as if you just know which course you're having your slalom in.
Yeah. One of the artifacts that I found in certain loader, Flash Loader, I think was one of them, is during the trailers. What would happen? Let's suppose the file is let's suppose we go ahead in time, and there are kind of it's being a turbo loader. The sort of pulses are much smaller. But what happens is that at the end of the file, what you see is that the trailer goes like this, which suggests that they turned off during at a save time when they were mastering the tape. What they've done, they turned off the motor, which didn't immediately turn off while they were still riding the trailer. Otherwise, it should have looked like this. It was what they should have done is ride the whole trailer and then start turning the motor off. This is a clear sign of the motor. It's kind of you can see it's exponentially going to 0 speed. And because this is a duration, it's the inverse of a frequency. It goes like this, and you can see this quite often in all flash load tapes. It's like this. In some cases, actually, if you zoom into this area, what you see here is actually a ringing effect, and it does like this, and then it decays. Because this is real, the real world with real components, with real motors. There are induction effects, not just this kind of capacity inductive loads. They all have different responses when in this sort of scenarios. And you can see, if you zoom in, you can see this sort of behavior when you turn off the motor in reality.
So when you do a tap clean of a tap that looks like this, are you picking the sort of center values of the respective bell curves and place them, or are you sort of keeping that variation?
Right. So the tap clean has got the concept of a perfect pulse. So if this is, bit 0 pulse, what happens here is that as long as it can be differentiated, it doesn't go past the threshold between the two, it's all these values are moved across, and they become ideal. Now this one becomes problematic. The program knows that this is part of a trailer, so what it can do is just remove this, it's just garbage, and just standardize the length of the trailer, so it really becomes like this. It really becomes what it should have been. But what can also happen is that the tab clean has got routines that actually follow this sort of patterns. It's the SKU adapt option, which was contributed by somebody who cooperated on this, actually added the support for a single loader, and for this sort of thing. It can actually, if this phenomenon is low enough, essentially the ideal pulse will move along, so the average one will move along, and you will be able to actually reconcile all of this. Instead of looking at it as noise and unrecognized, it will follow along. It will say this is still the trailer, and will acknowledge it as such. So yeah, it's a bit complicated. None of this was possible back in the day with the tape drive and the loader itself. But it didn't really matter because the trailer is not data. But it's funny how you can see that these things were happening because people were turning off the motor too early.
Yeah.
It's more of a curiosity, if you wish.
I mean, more the scrolling up. If you have a tape that has the slalom thing, so it's moving across the bell curve and placing, where the variation between each of these samples is quite big. Are you normalizing that when you execute the tap clean, or are you leaving it as slalom?
Right. So if you clean, that everything gets normalized.
Then it will be an laser sharp middle line.
Laser sharp. Yeah, that's right. Now the interesting thing about this SKU adapt option, not many know about this. I mean, this can be used in very very difficult cases, but you can have a slalom in which you cross the threshold between the two. But as long as there is enough gap between the two, you can still acknowledge each one as they should be. The SKU adapt option is quite powerful. Slows things down a lot, but even if there is no clear threshold, it will use moving averages to actually track where these values are going, if they're moving with the slalom. And very often it's just like you have friction in a tape, and what happens is if we focus just on one, what happens is it goes like this. You actually have this sort of phenomenon, and you have it for you have it for all three of them. This is difficult. You cannot find a clear threshold between the two. But the moving averages save the day in this scenario. And you can still actually read the whole data, and you can decode it, and you can remaster it with perfect pulses.
You can't pick like an average that would be applicable all across, but if you look at sort of every little interval, you can see that there is still three clear bell curve. It's just that the center has moved equally for all of them.
Yeah, that's right.
I suddenly realized the value of tap cleaning, because I mean, there are a number of cases where you can detect that the tap file is actually faulty, and you can make it absolutely perfect just looking at the distribution.
Yeah. This actually is a moving average. So there is a window that is moving, and it's so many samples. I don't remember how much, but essentially it moves the ideal value you're comparing against based on the last let's suppose the last 20 samples. It keeps moving it, so it moves as long as this stuff moves fairly smoothly. It can follow the value from tape. And I've had desperate cases in which without this option it would have been a nightmare. You could still essentially eye these things and normalize them manually in a hex editor, but that option is so much so powerful, and it makes it so much easier. It just follows along the phenomenon that happened, and normalizes everything.
And everything we discussed so far has basically been the Commodore stock loader, except the little example you had on the very bottom here.
Yeah, that's right.
But
Yeah.
But the principle still applies. So
yeah, it
again,
applies to
Commodore stock loader so far.
Yeah, that's right. Now, for comparison, if we go back to this one and appreciate the pilots, for comparison, I brought in Freeload, and already you can see that the duration of the waves, and this is the analog counterpart of this one. Again, I only put the one for the pilot. You can see the frequency is much higher, which means the duration of these square waves is much lower. These are ballpark values for Freeload for the pilot. Now the pilot itself is not 10 seconds, and that's one of the reasons for which this stuff loads already loads much faster. Every file hasn't got 10 seconds worth of pilot. But the other idea is that it uses only two frequencies, one for bit 0, one for bit 1, and every bit is encoded just with one square wave, which shaves off a lot of time. It's you can get very close to, if you do the encoding properly, there are loaders that load with a similar speed to a disk drive. And this is about the ROM routines for the disk drive. We're not talking about kind of sophisticated fast loaders and that sort of things.
No, we can't do parallel tape loading either. So
yeah, absolutely. What you can do, you can achieve a little bit better if you use encoding schemes with more than two frequencies, and then you start packing stuff. But then you have to wait for stuff to depack and that sort of thing. So for Freeload, when you have got a pilot, again, it's pretty much ballpark, bell curve normal distribution around about 272 clock cycles. Again, these are not precise. It's just something that I put together for these slides. When you have got bit 0 and bit 1 data interleaved, this is pretty much how it looks like. And again, I'd like to stress the fact that if you sample this signal once and you get these values, when you go back and sample it with a deterministic system, by all means, I mean, if you put fuzziness in this, of course, but with a deterministic system, you will never get the same values, which again, doing this with the excessive precision, it achieves nothing, honestly. But what you can see here, again, it's the histogram of the clock cycles you measure when you're scanning through a tape, the occurrences. And in this case, because the pilots are much shorter for Freeload, what you get is that these two bell curves pretty much have got the same order of magnitude in terms of occurrences. There's a little bit more because, again, as I say, the bit 0 is used for the lead-in and for the pilots and trailers. Now I've chosen Freeload, and this is something that I initially wasn't planning on commenting on, but I chose Freeload because talking with Tom recently, it kind of became evident why so many clones of Freeload, and why there are so many clones of Freeload, why so many tape loaders share the same encoding characteristics and some of the code. Now, it turns out that Tom and Paul Jones, or Ziggy72, they did a little bit of historical research on these sort of things, and they stumbled on an article on Your Commodore of all magazines, which was published in 1985. Was called Full Speed Ahead, and it did have all the basics, including the code for saving and loading for a fast loader. The article started pretty much like, we all know that the standard routines are very slow, and we all know that one of the first things people know is just they start thinking about buying a disk drive. But it says, hold on, not just yet. There might be a solution to this. And he proposes a fully fledged loader system, which Tom confirmed that Paul Hughes, the author of Freeload, had seen and had probably studied. And so lots of people back in the day probably saw this article and based their loaders, their Freeload clones or Freeload like loaders, Invader load and that kind of stuff, they based probably on the same article that was published on your Commodore. And yeah, that's again, that goes along the historical side of things that I was talking about last time. And I have to say that Paul Jones is not new to this sort of discoveries. I remember when he actually told me that some of the loaders that we were, kind of grouping together as the CHR loader were in fact saved with a tool that's called Mega Save, and that Mega Save had different settings to save in super fast speed or medium speed or slow speed. And yeah, it's painstaking work, research work, and trying things you find on cassette tapes, dumps, and that's why I'm positive and hopeful that the more we dump these things, the more we preserve, the more we look at actually what's on those tapes, the more information we will have that will aid that exercise in actually doing an historical reconstruction of what came when and who came from who.
But the conclusion here is that it might be that people didn't steal from each other. They just had a common information source where they picked, and then they implemented it. And because they implemented it from a common structure or base of information, it became the same basically.
Yeah. A lot of it can be tracked down to that. Yes, they had a common basis on which all of them built their own variants and their own peculiarities. But yeah
is the article online, so anybody who wants to read it can?
Yeah, I can share a link to it. And this is on archive.org. It's available there. It's a whole scan of the magazine. And that, as I said, if you look for it, your Commodore issue 14, November 1985, Full Speed Ahead is the name of the article. You might be able to find, but I will share the link to the article.
I'm not always very good at, I'm good at referencing that we will link down below, and then because I'm not doing the general mastering or publishing, we sometimes forget putting the links below. So, but I will try to remember this one, and because it's sort of vital to the discussion here.
Yeah, I will also send it over to you, so that we remember about this thing. So yeah, we talked about the skid marks. I thought why not having a look at some of them. And this is a web-based tape analysis tool that I wrote a few years back. Essentially, you can browse and load your own tape. And what you see here, the blue bands, essentially they are the bell curves. So you could say within a couple of sigmas you have so much of you have the likelihood of having pretty much 90% or whatever it is of the signals in that region. That's what these blue bands stand for. They're reference bands that help you to actually locate the pulses that are part of a tap file. Whether or not they are on these blue bands, it tells you pretty much that the tape looks okay. There are no artifacts introduced by a slower motor, because sometimes that's what happens. People say, "Oh, I've dumped this tape, but I didn't have the right PSU," and I say, "Okay, that's already bad." And then they show me these graphs, and you can see these traces all over the place. And I say, "Look, in theory, yes." The CBM ROM loader can adjust. The turbo parts cannot adjust. They don't have that sort of capability to adjust. So if you're doing this for preservation, and it involves non-standard loaders, by all means, this setup is not something that I would recommend at all. If it's just your Commodore CBM ROM loader programs you wrote when you were a teenager and you just wanted to extract the PRG, go for it. It's absolutely fine. But yeah, if it's for preservation of other material, then please don't do that, because that's not a good thing to do.
So if we start again, it was really clear that you had the pilot signal, and then you started having data, and then you had the next instance, the safe copy or the comparison copy. That was very clear that you run into the second one.
Yeah, the copy starts here. I mean, this is the first part of the header.
Yeah.
This is where the file name is. This is the second copy. There's a little bit of separation gap here in which you have low pulses. This is the data part, which has actually got the program that you want to load. And you can see the copy starts here. So every single file encoded with CPM ROM loader has got the copy. And yeah, again, that leads to its loader. But let's suppose you lose pretty much most of this in the very middle, not a problem. We can take it from here. So reliability was favored.
The stock loader wouldn't be able to recover it, but because it will just show you a load error if there is a comparison error. So they need to be the same. But if you have some sort of tool for recovery, then they can pick either of the two sections.
Yeah, and you could do actually this on the Commodore 64 itself. I mean, if you start calling the routines by themselves, you don't call the normal load. You call the kernel routines by their own. You can actually say, okay, give me the first header file, and it will say, okay, load error, there is an, and then you say, okay, give me the next header file. I would say, okay, that's fine. It's a little bit tricky because these things are slightly different, but it can be done. It can be hacked on natively on the machine, so that if one copy is broken, you could recover. If the first copy is broken, that's the worst scenario. If the first copy is broken, you can recover the second one. It can be done on it. But, tap clean, the front end, and this is one of the things that I coded, and it's just in that front end. If you have got this scenario in which one of the two copies is broken, it's totally automated. You can recover it, and it just takes the healthy copies it over, knows where to start, where to finish, how much to put in, what kind of damage there is there. It can auto-detect all of these things. I can do it for you.
Super.
Right. So there is another thing, and this is a little bit more of kind of an expert one. I've actually created this as a PowerPoint, as you can see, a few years back. But this goes through the technicalities of actually measuring the duration of these square waves with timers. And I'll probably not go, too far into the the technical details, but essentially, what this loader in Terminator 2, the tape version of it, does is it chooses a latch value for the timers, and then it lets the timers run down, count down, and in a continuous count. And what happens is that if the negative edge from the tape comes before the countdown has passed this red line, it's going to be a bit 0. If it goes behind that red line, so it's in this blue area, in this light blue area, it's going to be a bit 1. And the way you can optimize, you can choose this initial value, you can choose this value, you greatly optimize the way that you make these comparisons. Essentially, you don't need to do a comparison or a subtraction. You just do an XOR, and off you go. You just get the bit out of it. If you do it with this kind of strategies, for which you have values that don't seem to resemble the values that you need to measure, but it's kind of, this is clever choices made to save room, because don't forget, in an interrupt, when you're dealing with these very short signals, you want to be done as soon as possible. And the way to do that is not to make comparisons and not to make subtractions, but just be able to do, XOR operations that give you the value of the bit immediately.
Well, I mean, for the bit 1, you still need to wait until you get this negative, negative. What do you call it? Negative end or negative?
Yeah, it's a negative edge.
Negative edge, was it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so you are assuming, because it's sort of past what a bit 0 should be, so you can assume it's a bit 1, but you need to ensure that you wait until you actually get the negative edge.
Yeah.
Before it's because if you don't, then then that will come and you will misinterpret it.
Absolutely. That's there are two ways to do these things, to wait for this negative edge. One is with interrupts, but you can actually create an interrupt, enable it, and so that you have your service routine that says, okay, I'll read the timer value at the moment that the interrupt has occurred, and I'll prepare things for the next interrupt. Now you can do a lot of things in that interrupt routine, but you want to read the timer value as soon as possible. That's the bare minimum. Then you can do, the scroller text in Freeload. You can show a, picture. You can play a tune. You can do lots of things. But reading the value of the timer so that you know where you are, in which area you are, that's something you want to do as soon as possible. That's it. And then you restart the counter as soon as possible for the next measure. So other than that, and then you choose this short and long, short-term, bit 0 and bit 1 durations based on what you can do. And if you choose them too short, then maybe you cannot fit in a scroller message, the tune playback and that kind of stuff. But if you choose them, reasonable, there are hardware limitations on this as well. Kind of reliability is always going to be, a spanner in the works when you try to push this too low. But if you choose them sensibly, you can work your way through, and you can have things like Cyberload as well. Freeload, Cyberload that do actually have entertainment, or Invader Load, which you play Space Invaders while the program is loading.
Oh.
Yeah, the other way you can do this is actually you don't use an interrupt, and you have a tight loop in which you wait for bit 4 of the status register of the CIA, which is connected to the flag line, to be set. And then you say, okay, because it's set, now I know that this event has occurred. And again, you read the timer value and you go back to the busy loop. Essentially, what you do is every time you get one of these bits, you use an LSR or RAW instruction, and then you pack that bit in a kind of in a storage in a location where you actually build the whole byte. And then when one byte is done, you store it in memory using the current address pointer. You usually use a pointer in 0 page for that kind of stuff. And do a star. Yeah, that's pretty much how all of them do these sort of things. But this was quite interesting, because this goes really into the details of why these values are chosen, which seem to have no resemblance whatsoever with anything else. But again, there is a reason. It's this EOR with O2 here that you do on the most significant bit of the timer that you read. This simplifies the number of instructions that you have to use to just a single one, essentially, to measure the bits. And again, after the EOR, you have the bit already in the carry once you do a couple of LSRs. And then from there, you move it into the storage for the byte you're trying to receive with the RAW or roll, depending on the endianness you're using. It could be most significant bit or least significant bit first. So based on that, yeah, you can do the reconstruction very, very easily.
And the flag line interrupt, which of the CIAs is that one in?
I think it's the second one.
Okay.
So
we're not having a timer interrupt. It's a flag line interrupt.
Absolutely. The timer runs free flow, and then you set it once you get, as soon as possible, once you get the interrupt on the flag line. But yeah, you don't have other kinds of.
No, you don't use the timers for an interrupt. You just use that for a reference to measure time.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of your yardstick to measure these durations.
And what is also visible here is that you can't have the timers counting up. They're always counting down, which could seem a bit ridiculous, but that's what you have to play with.
Yeah, and that plays a role in the decision made for choosing these values. And
otherwise you would set it to 0 and then have it count up.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't do that. So yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Well, it's always dangerous to say that I think I understand it, but there could always be new aspects and new additional parts of it that you don't understand. But thanks for the very, very clear explanation. And I think that most of you who are interested in the C64 and tape would be able to digest it. If you don't understand it from the first view, then just watch it again, and I'm sure you would actually kind of get it, at least enough. I'm not saying this should be enough for you to write your own tape loader, but it gives you a fair understanding what the tools are exposing to you, and why tools are relevant. I mean, the cleaning part of things, remove the wobbly part, and salvage instances that the save was a bit off, and yeah, it was all very, very clear. And we talked mostly about Commodore stock loader and how that works, but most of the speed loaders use some sort of system that is rather similar. It might not have the 3 bars, it could have only like 2 bars, working with only 2 durations, but it is a duration. It's not sending zeros and 1. It's having the length of the square pulse.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Luigi, I learned so much. So thank you so much for taking the time to educate us. And thanks for being such a knowledgeable guy, so dedicated to sharing that knowledge. And I'm absolutely humbly grateful that I was able to receive that firsthand here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm happy to have been of help.
Great. So I think we should wrap this up, and thank you so much, Luigi, for taking the time, and looking forward to talk to you sometime in the near future. And if you are watching this, you could just wait another week and you would have another episode of FairLight TV. That was everything for this week. Super educational talk with Luigi. Cool guy, contributing a lot to the community and the scene. So we're really grateful for all the work that Luigi is doing, and very great contribution also to his team in Hokuto Force. That was everything for this this mini series of the talk with Luigi. Next week I actually have something prepared, so there will be a FairLight TV episode on the next FairLight Friday. Why don't you prepare yourself for that by visiting redbubble.com and buy one of those nice t-shirts that I'm wearing, or why not drink your coffee while you're watching in a FairLight TV mug? That would be something, wouldn't it? See you next week, guys.